webinar of the year, and we're going to be talking about the only 4 ways. We've made a pretty bold claim, only 4 ways to make profit, to change the way in which a profit works, and 4 levers to pull. So we're going to run through those today in a bit of detail. For those of you that haven't joined us before, my name's Joe Seckel. This is Tamara Daniel. We're both the advisory, or 2 of the advisory partners within PTP. And for those of you that have joined us, thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it. Bit of housekeeping. If this drops out for any reason, you should just be able to click the link again and jump back in. And if you have any questions, please feel free. On the right-hand side, there's a little chat box. If it's not already open on your screen, click a little message thing in the top right corner. It'll pop up. Please put any questions you've got on the way through. If we see them and we can answer them, we will. If not, we'll get them at the end. The presentation should take anywhere between sort of 35 to 40 minutes, possibly a little bit quicker than that. We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions, and we'll hang around as long as we need to.
Definitely.
All right.
Beautiful, Joe. Why we wanted to kind of go through, first of all, why we decided to do this webinar topic this time. It's something that Joe and I deal with a fair bit. But what we see is that business owners don't necessarily know their numbers. They are very invested in working in their business and don't have a lot of time to work on their business. And it actually leads to a lot of confusion when you see your accounts at the end of the year and they say, oh, you've made a $100,000 profit and you don't have $100,000 sitting in your bank. So there's a lot of confusion around profit, cash flow, and, where things are at. And what we see is that some simple changes can make the biggest difference, and then they can create an actual snowball effect from there. It actually seems a hell of a lot more complex with, information that's out there in the marketplace, but it is actually, as Joe said, very simple. There's only 4 ways. So let's crack into it.
Perfect.
Should we go to the next one? Before we start, though, we wanted to do a little poll. So I wanted to ask you, how confident are you that you know the key numbers in your business? So your gross profit, your net profit, your overheads, and your staff cost. If I was to ask you at any one point in time, what's your GP margin or what's your net profit, how much net profit are you making? Would you be able to answer that question off the top of your head? It's okay if you don't. A lot of people don't. So I just wanted to, pop that out there so we, Joe and I, get a bit of a lay of the land. Our answers are, you're confident that you know what that is, somewhat confident, or not at all. So if you're somewhat confident, maybe know some of those, maybe not others, or you know where to look for them. Awesome. Thanks so much for answering.
All right, guys, we've got a few. This happens all the time, Tam. We've got a few shy people. There we go. We've got a couple more. There we go. The numbers are coming through now. Thank you. We'll give another couple of minutes. We can see how many people have answered. We know there's a couple out there that haven't. So if you haven't clicked a button, we can't see who you are. Just click an answer. It just gives us a bit of an idea. I think that gives us a bit of an idea there. Anyway, is that and that's where we probably see it, and we're seeing that most people are sitting in that somewhat confident box. So not only a couple in the very confident and a couple in the not at all confident. So thanks for being honest for everyone and answering that. That's a pretty good subsection of what we would see with clients and business owners for sure.
Absolutely, it is. So before we crack into the 4 ways that you can increase your profit, we wanted to let you know what the crucial numbers are. So you can take a screenshot of this slide if you like, because these are the things that you're going to need to know to be able to, track if what you do going forward is making any difference or not. So what percentage of sales is your cost of goods sold or direct costs? And I've put down there on the right-hand side how you would calculate that. So cost of goods sold divided by your sales. What are your staff costs as a percentage of sales? So again, staff costs divided by sales. Staff costs being not just your wages, but your super, your work cover, any long service leave, all combined in together. Gross profit divided by sales gives you that gross profit margin, or a lot of people kind of just call it GP margin or GP. Your overheads compared to sales is your overheads divided by sales, and your net profit margin is net profit divided by sales as well. So just so you're aware, they are the key kind of indicators in your business that if Joe and I were to look at anything, just look at a piece of paper of your profit and loss, they're the 4 or 5 things that we are absolutely looking at to see where there's some little fires.
Tell the story. They tell the story. And just to clarify, COGS, just for cost of goods sold, as Tam said, really just includes anything that you need to pay directly to make your sales. So for some businesses, that's just buying stock to sell. For some businesses, that's paying team members to go out and do a job, and then you bill that work. It'll just depend on what that is. All businesses have some sort of cost of goods, but for some it's more than others. So yeah, just being mindful of that.
Definitely. All right, Joe, do you want to go through this one?
So we've all heard the term margins, and these terms get thrown around pretty loosely. We deal with them every day, so we're pretty used to them. But a margin can sort of be a little bit unclear as to what that means. And really, it's just how much you've got left over at the end of either your direct costs or all your other expenses is your net profit margin. So net profit margin is just what you've got left after you've paid all of your bills associated with running your business. A gross profit margin is what are your what amount have you got to put towards your profit, and then the ongoing costs of the thing. So higher margins generally indicate a company is more efficient at converting sales to profit. So you keep more of your money from the sales, which means your cost of goods are a little bit lower, your overheads, and lower margins may suggest greater competition or higher production costs. Now, that's low margin doesn't always mean bad, and high margin doesn't always mean good. So it just depends on the industry that you're in, and getting your head around that, and just making sure that you're aware of what they would look what that means for your business. So what do they tell you? Why are they useful? Why do we look at them? They tell us if you're not charging enough or you're charging the right level. They highlight efficiency and rework issues. So, for instance, if you're having to spend more time on jobs than you thought you would have when you quoted it, it can tell us that. The markup on the materials or the stock's not high enough, so it's not getting to a point where you're making enough to cover other costs and cover profit. Your sales aren't high enough to support your overheads, so it's you're not hitting that break-even point. Basically, is what that means. You can't pay your bills with what you've got left after you make your sales, or you're incurring unnecessary or wasteful overheads. So they help you make decisions about pricing and also cost control. So we're going to touch on overheads a little bit later. It's where a lot of people start, but it's probably somewhere that we would almost go last, which is a little bit different to the way most people approach it in terms of a business owner looking at it. And it just gives you a really good picture within a couple of numbers of how your overall business is running.
Definitely. So Joe and I, when we were putting this webinar together, we wanted to do a little bit of education at the start about some of these terms that you may have heard that you may not actually understand what they are, like a margin, or what do you really need to be looking at in your business. Before we kind of jump onto the, how can you improve on these things? So we're just building as we kind of go along. One thing that I like to go through, and so does Joe, go through with clients, is really simplify it down, because when you look at these key numbers in your business, you look at your gross or your net profit margin, and you look at some of those, overheads or wages as a percentage of sales, you are quite often dealing with bigger numbers. You're dealing with, hundreds of thousands of income and expenses, and to kind of simplify it a little bit, we'd like to look at it in terms of, for every $110 of sales, what do you have left at the end? So first of all, most businesses or 99% of businesses that we deal with are registered for GST. So for every $110 worth of sales, you lose your first $10 to the ATO with GST. This business here has 60% cost of goods sold. So there goes $60 to pay for the direct costs associated with their sales. 30% are overheads. So again, $30 goes off to pay the overheads, and all they are left with at the end of that $110 sale is 10% net profit, or $10. Now, this is a really common, scenario. And the reason why people struggle to understand where their profit's going is that $10 needs to then go and pay income tax to the ATO, because that's different to your GST. Any loan repayments. So if you've got equipment or vehicles or anything like that, then or a long-term business loan, those the $10 has to pay for that. Buying new assets, taking drawings or additional sums of money for yourself. So you can see why it's really important to know and simplify it for you to know that for every $110 worth of sales, I'm keeping $10, but then I might be spending $8 on here. So I'm actually only retaining $2. And that's a really powerful thing for you to know leading into, well, how do you make decisions strategically for your business going forward?
Or potentially worse, Tam, they got $10 and they're spending $12, which is the challenge. Starts to drain the accounts and go the other way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it's really important to know these numbers, isn't it, Joe? Because we see that a lot. Is that the loan repayments and things like that? There could be something that happens and the profit might drop down. I'm seeing that a lot in the trade industry at the moment with less sales coming through, less customers. People are being really cautious of what they're buying at the moment. So what can happen is your sales can shrink down, your overheads stay the same, and you're actually making less net profit than what you were, but your loan repayments don't change, do they? So that's kind of why we get cash flow problems.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right.
So let's go into this bold claim that there are only 4 ways to increase profit. We're going to prove it.
What are the 4 ways, Joe, before we run into it? Not putting the next slide up.
Yeah. So we either sell more of whatever we're doing, we increase efficiency or reduce our costs associated with making those sales, we increase our prices, or we reduce our overheads. And they're the only. If you think back to the slide around those key numbers that we spoke about earlier, where we look at gross profit margin, employment costs in terms of the sales, your net profit margin, all those things, all of those things are linked back to those four ways. They're just different parts of the profit and loss that flow through. So how we go, Tam? Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. I'm glad.
We'll have to come up with an acronym or something. So the power of compounding. So an increasing sales volume. So a 5% increase in any of those top 3. So raising your prices, reducing your cost of goods sold, or increasing efficiency. If you can gain 5% there on any of the top 3, it doesn't have a huge impact on that individual sale, but it does have a big impact to your bottom line. And that's because of the compounding effect. So for example, if you get a 5% increase on your gross profit and you have $1 million worth of sales, and that's by either, again, it doesn't have to be a 5% price increase. It can be using any one of those 3 levers. That will give you an extra $50,000 in profit straight to the bottom line. So that's an extra $50,000 in money in your pockets. You focus on overheads and you get a 5% reduction on a $1,000 a month phone bill. It's only going to give you an extra $600 in profit straight to the bottom line. So when Joe said before that overheads aren't, one to really focus on, that's why. The top 3 give you the biggest bang for buck. But when we're talking to business owners, quite often overheads is the easy one. It's the easy one and the first go-to for most people. And it's because you're not having to have, conversations with suppliers or customers or anything like that. And people just think, I'll just cut overhead. Just cut overheads and that will increase my profit. But you can see here, it's not going to have that desired effect that you really need to make a difference. Whereas if you increase, $100 sale by 5%, you're only charging a customer an extra $5. And they're not really going to notice that. Whereas if you do that on, a number of sales per day, which then compounds into per year, that's where you get that extra $50,000 worth of profit.
And I think, just be generous, like even take 50% off that phone bill. And we're not saying by any means don't look at overheads. We're not saying that that's not something to look at.
No.
We certainly would do that on a regular basis. For some clients, that's particularly over the last 12 months or so, or 2 years, with inflation and prices increasing and costs going up, that has been something we've had to keep an eye on very closely. But generally speaking, we would check that probably once every 12 months, maybe in some businesses once every 6 months. Once you've got that overheads line under control, and you've got an eye on it, that really doesn't move terribly much, and there's not a great deal to be gained there. In fact, it's more about just reviewing it and adjusting a little bit.
Definitely. All right, so let's go into it. Number 1, charge more for what you do. So increase prices. This is probably the most controversial out there at the moment, isn't it, Joe? Because a lot of feedback that we're getting from businesses is that they are coming up in the marketplace against people pushing back on prices.
Yeah, for sure. Whether it be competitors pricing lower to win the work to keep their businesses going, whether it be the fact that people just aren't spending on particular investments if it's over a certain price because they just haven't got the money, whatever that looks like. But certainly there's obviously a ceiling you can go to here. It's a bit of a grey ceiling, but it is a ceiling.
It is, absolutely. So understanding, I think for you as a business owner, you need to understand what your input costs are and what margins you're making at the moment. Understand what your product and service mix is, or if you've dealt with us, what your cake is. So generally speaking, you should have a varied product or service mix in your business. So you should have some low level, think of like a wedding cake where you might have 3 tiers, all kind of getting smaller as it gets higher. Your low level is your high turnover, low margin stuff that keeps your doors open. So that is things that you do every day to keep everyone in a job, but it's high volume, not a lot of margin. You then may have a product line or a service line that is more profitable, but you don't have as much of that work out in the marketplace. And then there might be the cream of the crop up the top, that top tier of the cake, where it's amazing margin, but there's just not a lot of that work around. So it's knowing what product mix and what margin you're making on each of those services or product mixes, and then being able to make a strategic decision of how can you do more of those top tiers where you get more margin and do less of the bottom tier where you've got less margin. And that's, I suppose, coming down to pricing and product strategy and that type of thing.
I think and that's why we talk about your cake, because some businesses have one layer of cake, and that's fine. They have a little sponge cake, but that's fine. They sell a lot of the same thing at the same margin all the time. That's fine. Some businesses have a lot more tiers. So it just depends on what your business looks like. It's just about, as Tam said, knowing what it is.
Yeah.
And
education and educating yourself on what that looks like.
Yeah.
So, if you do have to, this is one of the levers that you can pull. How are you going to justify higher prices? Thinking about improving that customer experience, or how can you create more value for money with your customers is something that we would kind of look at there. Also, just having a look at where you sit in the marketplace. So what are your competitors doing? What are they charging? What are they, offering? That you might be able to kind of have a look at in your business too. Now, I'm never one to copy people's prices, but if you're very much at the lower end of the market, then you've got to kind of ask yourself, why aren't you up there? And why do you not feel comfortable charging that price? Because quite often when we start out in business, we go quite low because we just want to kind of get our name and reputation out there. We want to build our brand up. But sometimes we can hold on to that a little bit too long, and it starts to hurt the business. Beautiful.
Tam, before we just move on there, Bernhard's asked a question here. We might just answer that because it's sort of relevant to prices and margins. Bernhard's just said, what margins are considered. I might just bring it up actually. So he's just asked what margins are considered as higher versus lower. And Bernhard, that really just depends on what industry you're in, because they are, as we said before, they are very different. I've got clients that would have between 5 and 7% margin on a really high turnover, and I've got clients that would have 20 to 30% net profit margin on a relatively lower, or certainly a lower turnover than the high margin business or high turnover business. So it depends on what industry you're in and what your input costs are in terms of your gross profit margin. And your net profit margin, will depend on a lot of different things. The net profit one at the end of the day is the key number, isn't it? Because that's really what we've got left after everything. So that's the measure we quite often go on. The gross profit just helps us get to the net profit margin. So more focus on that. We would start with the gross profit, though, to just give a bit of an idea of what the industry might be able to achieve and what the average might be, and if we're anywhere near that within the ballpark. If we're well better than that, well, maybe we've got to look at increasing turnovers or decreasing our overheads. How do we do that? So it just gives us an idea of where to go to start with. So the answer is it depends. In my book, Tam, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think the only other thing is that I would always recommend people have a look, maybe go to your governing industry body or something like that and get some benchmarks. What are other people in your industry doing? What are their margins? Because there's some with the ATO, but they're not that great, to be honest. They're for very small businesses. A lot of the businesses we deal with are a lot bigger than that these days. And I think going back to your governing body, I'm not quite sure what kind of business that you have, but they will be able to give you some margins of the data that they've got from businesses similar to yours. And that would give you an idea of, where other people are situated. So I think that's a good thing. And it also just is that net profit margin, depends on how leveraged you are in the business makeup that you have as well. Because, if you're getting a 5% return on, $10 million, then that might be enough to be able to cover all of those after profit expenses like your loans and your drawings and your income tax and all of that. And it might be a very highly profitable, highly cash flow, business. But if your margins are not, then that indicates that there's a bit of a problem somewhere along the line.
Yeah. Bernard, hope for that points in the right direction. All right, we'll keep rolling. Excellent.
Beautiful. Oh, sorry, I think I skipped.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So this is the common one, and we get this all the time. Typical accountants, all you're telling us to do is increase prices, and if we could do that, well, it'd be really easy. I get where that's coming from to a degree, but the reality is for a lot of people, most businesses we work with, there is an adjustment in price in some way, shape or form. It's not a massive one quite often, but there is a review and an adjustment and an awareness around it. And the first fear that most people would experience when we talk about increasing prices, and test this on yourself, is I'm going to lose customers, or I'm not going to win the work that I would win if I add more margin to a project that I'm quoting, for instance. And what we say to that is, for the amount of times we've done this with businesses, the fear and the actual result that occurs after the changes have been made are just nowhere near in alignment. And this is further to, I suppose, just to help clarify and maybe comfort people when they go to do that. We use things like this, where it's okay, well, what happens if you do lose sales? So worst case scenario, you lose some projects or you lose some customers and they're not coming to you anymore. What happens to your numbers? And we're assuming a business is turning over $1 million, GP margin of 50, overheads of 250, just to keep the numbers nice and simple. Turnover of $1 million, overheads 250, profit of $250,000. Now, if we increase our prices by 10% across the board, our turnover now goes to $1.1 million. Our gross profit increases to 600. Because our cost of goods have stayed the same, we're assuming, and so our price increase just goes straight to the gross profit, which then flows through to the bottom line. Overheads stay the same. Again, we've just increased our profit, so there's no need to change our overheads there. And our profit goes from 250 to 350. So it just flows straight through that price increase to the bottom line. Now, if you then said, well, I'm going to lose some customers for this, or I'm not going to win as much work, you would actually have to lose 17%, so almost 1 in 5, if you're looking at individual spend customers, of your total sales to bring that back to exactly the same net profit result as what you had before the price change. It's very unlikely, and all we can tell you is we look at this every day, and we just don't see it happen. So you may lose some, you gain others. That's the nature of business. Like, it always flows through like that. And the new ones that come on don't have any awareness around what your price was, perhaps. And they're quite happy paying that, or as Tam said before, you do some things to change the value that you're providing there, or perhaps communicate it more effectively. So it just shows you that you could increase it by that much, and obviously those numbers change depending on how much you increase the prices by, but you could stand to lose a significant amount of volume in your sales and still be in exactly the same position, or you could just keep them and you'll be 100 grand better off in this scenario. Again, all we can say is we see it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. So the second lever is selling more. So increasing your sales volume. So more sales equals more value. So either expand into other revenue streams or markets, like so offer a new product or service or something like that. Upsell or cross-sell if you're in that type of industry where you can. If you have the workflow or the demand though, and you've got that ongoing, then you could add another staff member and you would still increase your gross profit on that sale, and that would go straight to your bottom line because your overheads don't change. So that's one there where sometimes you just need to do more. So it's not just increase your prices and charge more. Sometimes just doing more, doing higher volume, increasing that productivity percentage could make a really big difference to your bottom line. And that's if it's to do with productivity, say your staff are only operating at 60 or 70%, and you can increase that to 80 or 90 with some internal efficiency changes, and so you're able to do more and increase that sales volume, well, that makes a really big difference. And that's a really hidden silent cost of your business that you can't really quantify, can you, Joe?
Well, unless you're measuring it and looking at it, it's hidden because quite often people don't look at it and don't understand what the difference of that is. And we're going to cover off that in a little minute with the efficiency part of it. But this is really all about just saying, well, can we sell more of what we do with exactly the same setup as we've got? Or as Tam said, if you've got the demand there, putting a few more people on to help out with completing that work and charging that, puts you in a very similar position of growing your profit anyway. So that's really what that's about. And again, for some businesses, they're making the most of this. So it's not all these levers are going to be applicable to your business. That's something we probably should have said at the start as well. Just have a think about on the way through this, as we go through the four of them, which one of these is actually going to be, or all four, or a combination of a couple, which ones are going to be applicable to your business, because that's really what it's all about. All right, moving on to the next one. Whoops,
beautiful.
Sorry.
You're right. So reducing your direct costs.
We're cheating a bit here because you may notice there's three arms to this. So when we say there's four ways to reduce profit or increase profit, there's actually probably seven, or six, but that's okay. We'll bat on. Reduce the direct costs to earning your income. So that's negotiating better prices with your suppliers. So can you buy more of what you're selling for cheaper? Can you increase efficiency there by buying more from them, for instance, buying in bulk and getting a better price? Paying on time or paying earlier, discounts if there's anything around that. Again, that's something we're seeing creep in a little bit more now with cash flow being more important, is that people are offering discounts to pay on time or certainly earlier. So that can be a useful thing. Improving efficiency, Tam touched on this before, but it's really, can we do more of what we're doing quicker? Or do what we're doing quicker in order to get through more of it, and then be able to utilise either the labour or the parts, whatever, for more work and increase that turnover. So that's all about streamlining your operations and your systems, using automation when you can, investing in technology to help you be aware of where you can actually find some of these hidden things, and invest in training yourself and your team so you get better at what you do, and you're then able to deliver more of that. And then it's eliminating bottlenecks. Now, one of the key things we do, and I think we've done this on a number of webinars, shown some examples around working with clients to understand where the bottlenecks are within their business. It's a very, very useful exercise that we go through with them, where we look at their operating workflow, and it points out pretty quickly where the cash flow issues are and where the operational bottlenecks are. And removing those bottlenecks as much as possible is a great way to increase cash flow, but also profit. So they're the three within that reduced direct costs you can do to improve that profit.
Yeah. Beautiful. And overheads. So overheads, as we discussed, is that fourth lever. So reviewing those and eliminating any waste. I know it's something that, as Joe said, we don't do, monthly with clients, but we do encourage them to do it at least yearly, even, every 6 months, depending on what they look like. Reviewing those overheads, eliminating anything that shouldn't be in there. Quite often, like subscriptions is a really big one, isn't it, Joe, where people, sign up for things or sign up for software and they're just not utilising them. So really kind of looking at what you can do there. Are you carrying things that you shouldn't be, and just eliminating that waste?
I think the other thing there too is running a budget versus actual every month is a very, or at least quarterly, is a very useful thing. So having a budget to begin with, and then looking at it and saying, well, most clients, when we're working with them and running that, their overheads won't move. We don't actually break it down terribly much into rent and power and all that stuff. It's more just overheads line. We budgeted 10,000 a month. It's 11,000 a month. Okay, well that's fine, or it's 9,000 a month, and we move on. If you're doing that and the budget, you've agreed on that 10K as the number that you're going to work with, then you're pretty fine moving forward, and then you can just review it when you do the budget again the following year. But just keeping an eye on that. And we're just going to go through in a minute, like with this case study we're going to run through, that the impact that reducing overheads has. It's not a one to be forgotten at all,
No.
but it's certainly not one to be started on. Okay, so case study. This is a client we did some work with back a few years ago now, and they were running a bakery/cafe that they'd got into without really much background in that industry. They had a bit of a passion for cooking and that sort of thing, but and had worked in his hospitality somewhat, but they had never owned a hospitality business or a bakery. So they were very up in the air as to what they should charge. They're really just going on what went through previously. They really didn't know what things should cost them, any of their key numbers really. So they had come to us because they were a bit concerned about what their numbers were showing, and this is what they look like when they came to us. So turning over about $750,000. Their cost of goods, so their ingredients and all of their things to make the food, was at 45%, so about 340 grand. So keeping about 412,000 of their sales. Then they had wages and super for people obviously working in and selling the items in the bakery, and then they had overheads of 112, of which half of that was their rent. So not a lot of other overheads, relatively small amount there for other things. So they were left with, at the end, of the 750 grand, they were left with $37,500. So not a great deal when it's, that's effectively then feeding a family for meals and other things, and their drawings, and they're paying tax out of that. Like, we're paying a lot of tax at that level. So it's not a lot left over to survive on. So they were coming to us saying, well, we think we're going to have to close the doors. Can you have a look at this and give us a hand? So just thought we'd take you through some of the things, again, practically how these things work and where we would start with them and what we started looking at. So the first thing we did was we reviewed and increased the prices. Their prices were not at a level that was commensurate with the market. They were well underpriced on a lot of their items that they were selling. Other than the drinks and the things with recommended retail, anything they were making in there and selling was well under price. So we certainly focused there. In order to help them out there and get a bit of confidence, we ran through some of the scenarios that we went through earlier with the sales, but also got them to ring around and go into other shops as well. That's a pretty cheap way to work out what's going on in the market. Go and buy a sandwich or something at a competitor's bakery, see what they're charging you. And you get a pretty good idea of where you're at and where you're sitting. We reviewed their suppliers, their serving sizes and their menu. That was more a them thing. We certainly don't specialize in any of that sort of stuff. But we got better deals with their suppliers. So they spoke to their suppliers. We coached them through that. We helped them understand some of the things they might be able to ask, and got them in a spot where they had less suppliers and they were getting better pricing. They measured the actual cost of ingredients on their highest selling items. What was it actually costing them to make that stuff? And they cut out a lot of lower selling items to reduce waste. So things that they were making and not selling, was just a waste. There was a lot of that sort of stuff that was relatively small volume when you looked at it individually, but 10 or 12 or 15 of those lines makes a lot of volume over. It makes a lot of wastage over a 12-month period. We improved the rostering of their team, so they their margin, their percentage of wages versus their sales was just nowhere near where it should be, and that stood out pretty clearly. We reviewed how they were rostering their team and how that compared to the sales. We trimmed a very small amount of unnecessary overheads. There really wasn't much to play with there. We increased engagement with the community clubs. This is in a small town, to grow volume. So just a bit more involvement in footy clubs and netball clubs, soccer clubs, whatever they were involved in. Effectively, it wasn't just for the sake of putting money in there; they needed to be in there as well. And completed some financial modelling to show the upside. So when we started to go through this stuff, they were like, "Oh, I'm not sure we can increase the prices. Not sure we can do that. There's no room there." So we just showed them, okay, well, this is the difference it could make. And that could actually be a really viable business if we can get it to this point. Now, we don't have to do it in 5 minutes. We can take a bit of time, but here's some of the things we can do. And then we help them through the decision-making process. And they work through that in a few different steps. So you can see it's pretty extensive. We've gone through a fair bit of stuff there with them to get it to a point where we then finished up. And this actually, believe it or not, happened within 12 months. I was telling Tam about this the other day. I couldn't believe the results, the changes they made, because once they started to see the changes, they really just rolled on with it. So their sales increased from 750 up to 862. Now, some of that was the increase in prices. Some of it was the increase in volume that came from more people coming in and buying some things. The COGS, the reduction in the price there means that basically their COGS stayed the same as what it was, or a little bit lower, for way more sales. So the percentage dropped to 37%, still a little bit high, but it was much better than where it was at. So their gross profit was now down at, now up at over $500,000. Wages and super, again, they sold more stuff with a more efficient team. And their overheads we trimmed by maybe 5,000 or 10,000 across the year. It wasn't a great deal. So the net profit went from 37.5 to just under $200,000 in 1 year. So a huge uplift in the profitability. Very little, once they started to see some results, very little resistance from internally. They were really concerned about a lot of different stuff, which again, that more than understandable. They could only see, they'd looked at all their overheads and they've gone, we can't cut anything out here. We're going to have to close the doors. And as soon as we started to look, as that Tam said, those numbers up the top there that really compound and make a really big difference, they're the scariest numbers to change, but they make the biggest difference. And that's why they're the scariest. So,
and I think to also note, Joe, is that they've used all 4 of those levers, right? They've charged, they've done more, they've increased efficiency, and they've also looked at their overhead. So all 4 levers have been pulled to get the result, such a dramatic result. I think that's the thing is, if you want an extra 5% on your bottom line or 10% or whatever that looks like, you don't have to necessarily just focus on one of these.
Yeah.
Focus on one at a time, but just to, reduce the amount of work that you have to do. But it doesn't always have to come from just raising your prices or just, negotiating with suppliers and trying to get that. I think that's, something that all 4 of those levers can be, utilised and pulled at any one time.
Great point. Yeah, for sure. Like that's, you don't get that dramatic of a shift from doing, or quite often from doing one of those things. It's
That's right.
Several. But for most people, there is several things that they can do. So, so the results. So the increase in net profit of 17%, or nearly 160,000 per year. So over 5 years, nearly 800 grand. Over 10 years, $1.6 million. Huge amount of difference in their business. Now, even if that settled down a little bit and they sort of backed off a little bit over a few years, they're still well up, making more than enough money to live on and be comfortable, and have a really thriving business and be enjoying what they're doing without having that financial stress. And they're then able to sell, which is what actually happened down the track. They were then able to sell their business for a lot more than what they were doing. They'd actually come in because one of the things that they were looking at other than closing the doors was selling it. And with the net profit where it wasn't viable. Someone was not going to buy that. It was basically almost going to be a walk. They just walk out and not have any, basically sell the plant equipment. There was just no business there to sell. So going from that to a point where they can, potentially sell it for a few $100,000, as well as the extra profit through the years, huge difference. So I said they're ready to close the doors, and now they've got a profitable and efficient business. And just going back to some of those things, these are some of the things that you might be scared of when we look at something like that, or it might pop into your mind. I made a bit of a list of some of the things that that we had to work through with them. One of them was obviously losing customers with the price increase, or having more complaints due to increased pricing. You've got potentially people that are serving customers having complaints, which doesn't make it a great environment for them. There was a real concern about that, particularly because some of the people were family and friends. So that was a bit of a challenge. Not wanting to approach suppliers to ask for better pricing. So they didn't want to be seen to be trying to, basically bargain down or to try and cut them out as much as possible. They were really concerned about doing that, thinking they needed to offer as much as possible in terms of their menu and what they were selling, keeping it as simple as possible to reduce that wages. So keep it as simple as possible, but no less simple than that. So they're not wanting to lose team members due to rostering changes. So they're like, well, if we tell this person they've only got 5 hours during the week as opposed to 10, what does that mean? And we just worked through all of those things. Having younger team members causing challenges, the training and the quality of service was another thing that they had some real concerns about. So all those things are very real. We understand that, but that's when it then becomes about, okay, if that's the number we want to get to, and that's the target, we need to be able to overcome those concerns, or we just accept them and we don't make the changes. And that's really up to you as a business owner as to what you decide to do there.
Definitely. So which of these strategies fits best into your business and your overall strategy? As Joe was saying, as we kind of went through, not everything is relevant to every business. So we wanted to do a little bit of poll here. So which one of these probably resonated most with you? Was it increasing the volume of the completed work? Was it charging more for what you do and sell? Is it reducing your costs or finding efficiencies in your business, or cutting out unnecessary overhead and waste? So if you use the what do you call it? Poll answers. Don't be shy. Make sure that you jump on and give us a bit of an answer. There's
right.
Yeah.
Kevin coming. That's good.
I love. So we've got a very mixed bag here. Good. Of the top 3 levers.
Yeah.
So probably 40% of people are saying that they would probably charge more for what they do or sell. 30% are saying that they would increase the volume of work that they would do, and 30% reduce the costs or find efficiencies in their business. No one answered cutting out overheads, which is great.
Awesome. I'm assuming that, again, probably quite a few people have gone and done that already, and that's that's something that is not necessarily that's on the table anymore, or there's not as much benefit there. So, and for the other 35% that haven't hit a button, I'm assuming it fits into one of those. So, thank you for those that did. That's great. Okay. So we always like to end these things with an action, because we've asked you to come along, spend some time. Hopefully, you've learned something, or something's come across the screen there that we've spoken about that stood out to you. Because you only need one thing. We all know we're busy enough in business that any more than one thing, it's probably not going to necessarily sink in or move into our day-to-day anyway. So pick one thing. And we're saying, why is that the most attractive lever? And then the key question here is, what are you going to do to have an impact on that outcome? So what are you going to change? If you've said that charging more is what you would do, what could you do? What's one little action you could take to understanding what you could do about that, or to changing it? So ask that of yourself. We're not going to necessarily ask you to share that. We're more than happy to have a discussion with you about how you could do it and how we could help. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to. Otherwise, just hold yourself accountable to that, and make the most of it, because it's an important. It's a massive thing. If you can change the profit, particularly by as much as the other business, and even by half as much as that, makes a significant difference.
Absolutely, it does. Feel free to leave any questions, guys. I think we always say, Joe, to just choose one thing, because we do go through a lot in these webinars, but you do get busy and you kind of might go, oh yeah, I want to do this, and this. But as we said, choose one thing because that's what's going to actually be achievable. And then you can always come back and do another thing after you get that done, and then do another thing. But if you say that you're going to go away with 5 actions, the likelihood of you completing any one of those 5 is really slim. If you say you're going to do one, you'll probably go and complete that one thing. Beautiful. All right.
I suppose the last message I'd leave there is don't let your business get to a point where that client was at, where that bakery was at, where they felt forced to come in and really, almost put it on the table to say they're going to close the doors. Like, we don't want to get to that point before we start making some of these decisions. In some ways, it can actually really move things along because you have to. You either go one way or the other. But you can also be in a position where you know that information and make those decisions without being under that level of pressure. So Tam and I would both encourage you, get these numbers together, understand what they look like, move yourself from being in that somewhat understand to really understand what those numbers are, and then make some decisions from there. And you might change nothing. That might be fine, but at least you're empowered and you know exactly where you're at and what your options are.
Absolutely. And look, we're always here. If you are going through this, you're unsure of where to go, you're unsure of who to ask, just contact Joe or myself, and we will more than, have a chat to you, talk through this type of stuff, have a look at things with you if you ever need it.
Wonderful. We're at 46 minutes, so we've gone slightly over. We will hang around. If anyone has any questions they want to put in, feel free. Otherwise, if we don't see anything come through in the next 30 seconds or so, we might call it. But thanks again for coming along. And hopefully you've been able to have some lunch and have a bit of a break and learn something. We're getting some thank yous. Excellent.
No problems, guys.
Thanks, Nolene. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Brian.
Beautiful. All right. Doesn't
Excellent.
look like we have any questions. Looks like we must have done a great job of answering them all along the way, Joe. Thank you so much, guys. So we'll end it here, but please get in touch with us if you have any questions offline.
Right. Thanks, Tam.
Beautiful. No worries. See yous.